Hello, Hello, everyone, and welcome back to This Day in History, our nightly look back at a specific day in history, where we take a look back at the events of that day, the historic context of the events, and the historic ramifications of those events. As always, if you have not yet, hit the subscribe button, the bell notification icon to be alerted anytime I post new content, and tell a friend. And without any further ado, this day in history, March 19th. And on this day in 1979, C-SPAN began gavel-to-gavel coverage of the House of Representatives. A young, then representative from Tennessee by the name of Albert Gore Jr. gave the first speech on the House floor that day and noted the historic occurrence of the day. At the time, only 3.5 million Americans had access to C-SPAN. C-SPAN is funded by cable and satellite subscribers. A small portion of the bill that you pay if you have cable television in this country or satellite television goes to fund C-SPAN. And by virtue of being a cable subscriber, you receive access to C-SPAN, in most cases C-SPAN 2, and in a growing number of cases C-SPAN 3. C-SPAN 2 would launch in 1986 and preside gavel-to-gavel coverage of the Senate. When the House is not in session on the floor business, they'll cover House committee hearings, coverage of public affairs programming, and presidential executive branch level events in Washington. C-SPAN 2 on the weekend, of course, is Book TV, and C-SPAN 3 is American History TV. One of the great things that C-SPAN does is it offers long-form programming with no commentary. That it is basically your eyes and ears as if you were there watching the proceedings. When I traveled to Washington, D.C. in 2004, one of the things I was most excited about doing as a C-SPAN viewer was going to the House and Senate gallery and watching the proceedings happening there on the floor of the House and Senate and the pomp and circumstance of it all. I'm a huge C-SPAN watcher. And I was probably the only teenager in the gallery of the Senate that day that knew who Barry Black was, or who Mitch McConnell was, or who Harry Reid was, and Dick Durbin, and on the House side, all the major players that came to speak that day. I do believe that a young representative from Indiana was presiding as Speaker Pro Tem of the House while I was sitting in the gallery that day. Who would go on to later acclaim as a governor of Indiana and currently Vice President of the United States. But C-SPAN began on that day. And there were a few representatives in the body that saw the potential of this. I've talked in the past about Newt Gingrich and what he saw, the potential of it. You have to think, Gingrich is sworn into the House of Representatives in January of 1979. And here in March, we have C-SPAN beginning. And Gingrich, knew the power of it and really used it to his advantage. It also went from where members would just have speeches inserted into the congressional record and never actually deliver the remarks to actually going to the floor and delivering them. You would get some eccentric members that would come to become known as C-SPAN stars. Louis Gohmert is the current most prominent example of this, probably followed by Steve King. Both of them are very big users of the in morning business when they can go and give speeches on whatever they like. On the floor, you can also look back and see that Bob Dornan was another member that would often do this. And James Traficant. And these are not members whose leadership of their own party looked forward to coming to the floor. They are very eccentric members of the body. Or in Dornan and Traficant's case, were Dornan would often make very controversial remarks, and of course Traficant would later be expelled by the House of Representatives. But yes, 1979 gave birth to C-SPAN, and as I have said previously, the election of 1978 for the House of Representatives is, and really all those elections in that midterm, it's a very interesting time. A lot of stuff going on that has major implications down the road. Births that occurred on this day. In 1891, in Los Angeles, California, Earl Warren was born. Sorry, I'm drinking. I've got a terrible case of hiccups, and this is really helping, so have to bear with me. He served as governor of California from 1943 until 1953, and Chief Justice of the United States from 1953 until 1969. He was the 1948 Republican nominee for Vice President of the United States, and briefly sought the Republican nomination for President in 1952. He was appointed to the court by President Eisenhower. Although he was from California, him and the Vice President at that time, Richard Nixon, were political enemies. That's part of why he was appointed to the court. But he took the court in a much more liberal direction and really brought in an era of reform to the court. He had many landmark rulings, many of which he wrote himself. Brown v. Board of Education in 1954, Reynolds versus Sims, One Man, One Vote in 1964, Miranda v. Arizona, Loving v. Virginia. And Warren was a controversial figure in his time. The John Birch Society had bumper stickers that says, impeach Earl Warren. And a lot of your conservative legal scholars of this day strongly believe that the Warren Court overreached in many areas. I tend to think that the Warren Court was one of the more significant moments in American history where the courts needed to correct wrongs in American society, and it was the only avenue they had was the courts. You have other cases that were very impactful, not only for the initial ruling, but forming the basis of rulings down the road. Griswold v. Connecticut is one of the more prominent ones that will come to mind, because the precedent set in Griswold would eventually lead to Roe v. Wade down the road. So, that is that. He also was on the Warren Commission, was the head of the Warren Commission, and upheld the Constitution that, in fact, the Civil Rights Act of 1964 was constitutional in Heart of Atlanta Motel versus the USA. And he is the only California governor elected to 3 consecutive terms as of the recording of this video. Deaths that occurred on this day. In 2014, at the age of 84 in Topeka, Kansas, an awful garbage human being died. Fred Phelps. Fred Phelps. I'm not even going to call him a pastor. He was a hate monger, and ran an organization known as Westboro Baptist Church. Phelps was a disbarred lawyer, and just a awful person. If you remember during the Iraq War, you would see stories about people protesting the funerals of our soldiers that would die in Iraq and Afghanistan. Well, that was Fred Phelps' organization. Fred Phelps said that the deaths of American soldiers was God's punishment for America accepting homosexuality. I'm not even going to say the name of his website that he and his followers ran, but it is God hates, and then a derogatory term for homosexuals. As I said, just a terrible person. And because of Phelps' activities, many states passed laws banning picketing of funerals. And his you have to say it takes a special horrible person to protest the death of an American soldier, but Fred Phelps did it. And really, you cannot find hardly any mainstream commentator that would defend Fred Phelps. But as I said, he would protest the soldiers of America, the funerals of American soldiers. He protested Ronald Reagan's funeral. He would protest anybody's funeral that was prominent just to get his name in the news. And he would go on programs defending his actions, or his daughter, who also was is a as I said, just not good people. So on this day, Fred Phelps died. I will see you all tomorrow. Have a great night.